Now we're going to talk about Cascading Vision, the power of the one thing, and a little bit about dominoes and the almost exponential effect that you have when you increase a small little tiny domino, you increase it by 50% in size. And after 7 or 8 increases in domino size, it's able to knock over a block that weighs a couple hundred pounds or 100 kilos and is chest high. And if you were able to keep going, we'll show you on the next slide how that works. In this section, your takeaways are dominoes as a metaphor, cascading vision, including cascading the VSPT, cascading the one thing, and then linking that back from the individual and team level to the levels above, all the way back up the organization. There's a few things to remember when cascading vision, and one of them is the difference in languages. There's a difference between the language of management and the language of leadership. Start to write a dictionary or a lexicon for your company or business that you're in, and I can guarantee you, you need to listen closely to what the executives are saying and the words that they use, and you're going to notice that they almost speak a different language. And then there are additional languages that are spoken in an organization. The technology guys speak a language and the business guys speak a language. So that's another potential mismatch in languages. You need to look at dilution, how much of your message is actually getting through, because I give examples of 10, 20, and I think 50% or something like that. But it ends up being that already at like 10 or 20%, barely half of your message is getting through if you have multiple levels in the organization, and that's if you're really good at communicating. And then you need to prioritize using the one thing. You can't do everything. You need to choose the one thing that's going to deliver the most value for the organization, focus on that for the year, and do it. Finally, you need to look at your personal vision and your personal mission in this section as well. It's a geometric progression, and like I said, you increase it by 50%. If you start with a 2-inch domino, what's that, 5 centimeters? By the 19th domino, if you keep increasing the size, it's taller than the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And so what we're trying to communicate here is the power of the feedback loop. It only takes a little domino to have an exponential effect on the organization. So one of the visuals that we use in bringing cascading vision to life is a concept that the small feedback from deeper in the organization can have this like almost exponential impact further up the food chain, which we're going to show on the next slide. I'm going to include this video link as well as the one with Jamie earlier. Both of those will be included in the playlist on YouTube for this FCP course. So you'll be able to look at those and get a feeling for what we're talking about. The video link had changed from when we published our book. So if you take the link in our book, that's not correct. So you'll want to actually click the link that we have in the playlist there, and I'll try to make sure that that's kept up to date so that people can have the link to the video that we're talking about. The concept of cascading vision may be among the most powerful tools that we have for leadership in flow and the flow leadership framework. We combine the concept of cascading the VSPT, which again is vision, strategy, people, and tasks, and every area or level. I hate using hierarchies, but it's really tough not to. There's an executive VSPT. What's the vision? What are the strategies? Who are the people that need to be on the team? And what are the tasks that they're going to do in order to lead and inspire the organization? And then you're going to have a senior management level, and that will probably include portfolio management, among other things. And they're going to have a VSPT as well. At the program management level and line management level and product management level, they're in that third box, you're going to have a VSPT for all of those as well. And then if you use projects, more and more companies are just skipping that and doing programs and putting the teams into programs instead. The project will have a VSPT. Do we have a vision strategy for the project? Do we have the right people? And are they doing the right things? Then the team, of course, it's the same. Do we have VSPT for the team? And then individually, the individual, their personal vision and their personal strategy, their why for being there, all of this needs to align going back up the food chain. Okay. Now, the one thing, we're going to talk about that in a few more slides, but that's basically the power of the one thing. And that one is where you, for example, one executive that came up with this, he was leading a very huge real estate empire that had grown to one of the largest real estate empires in the United States. And he did that by employing the power of the one thing. Each year, at the beginning of the year, he'd write down his 25 top initiatives of, if I did these 25 things, this would happen. And he would let that list sit for a couple days, and then he would come back and he would cut it by 80%. So he would take the top 5. He would prioritize his backlog, his list, and put it in ranked order of value, and would say, oh, these are the top 5. If I did these top 5, then this is what would happen for the organization. But the wisdom and the power of the one thing is that realistically, you're not going to do those 5 initiatives during the year. And so he would once again let it sit for a couple days, then come back and go, okay, of these top 5, which is the one thing. If I did this one thing, it will have this exponential impact on our organization. And it worked. It really worked. He ended up having just insane percentages of growth in his business year on year on year on year until he became one of the largest real estate agencies in the US. One of the things that we link back, and we do this via using retrospectives with the team. We do team health checks. We do flow friction analysis. We use retrospectives a lot. And from all of those, over time, about every 3 months roughly, we would try for the team at least. Individuals would give their one things back to the team. But from a team perspective, we were shooting for, if there's this one thing that the executives could do for us, and they were able to do this for us in the next 3 months, that would enable our team to do X, Y, and Z. And so that's the whole concept of having the little bit of a wafer small domino knocking over bigger and bigger blocks as you go up the food chain. Now, as you're going up the food chain, if you're at the executive level and you've got 100 teams in one of the portfolios, you may or may not want to be looking at those 100 one things. But this is why you limit it to one thing, because otherwise, if each team came up with a laundry list of 10 or 20 items, you'd be looking at 1,000 or 2,000 items for maybe a single portfolio. The executives just do not have time for that. And so as it's going up the food chain, it needs to be filtered by the leadership as it's coming up so that they can help guide the organization in, okay, we've sorted through this list of 100, there's 10 left. They hand those to the executives and just say, okay, if the team's got these 10 things in the next 3 months, they would do X, Y, and Z. And then the executives can make an informed decision on that. Now, there's always the risk that maybe the one thing that didn't get through, going through that kind of filtering process, is the one thing that you actually needed. So I would almost want the executive to see the whole list of 100 and start to get a feel for what it is that the teams are up against. Now, if you're wondering what BHAGs are, and that's there on the left, that's big, hairy, audacious goals, and that comes from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. And it's sort of a parallel thought to the one thing. When you're dreaming big and trying to achieve remarkable things, you need to have goals and objectives that are big, hairy, and audacious. A lot of times the executives will hand us a flashlight and a spoon and point us to this cave that has a big, hairy monster in the cave with very sharp teeth, and the monster isn't happy. And so by creating BHAGs, you're really trying to address the big, hairy, audacious goals, those monsters that you want to achieve and to win over. So there's a few things that we'll need to remember when we're cascading vision. The first one is language, and that there are many languages and many dialects spoken within an organization. There's also dilution that happens in an organization as the messages are communicated forward. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about distillation and distilling the one thing. As we mentioned earlier, if you've got business content, tools, and technology, they typically really don't communicate well with each other, and this falls into the first issue of language. And so it becomes a blocker, an obstacle, or an impediment. This also dovetails into what we did with the Stacy diagram and the complexity of the communication. If it's complicated, complex, or even chaotic, then that makes it even more vital to use agile methodologies, agile mindsets, and agile ways of working to overcome this first blocker and obstacle in language. And so we put a little explosion there. So between business content and knowledge side of the organization and the tools and technology side of the organization, they think that they're communicating to each other, but many times they're not on the same page. They may even be using the same words and mean two very different things. I can give an example. If my wife goes to the closet and says, I don't have anything to wear, it's not because there isn't clothes that are hanging in the closet. 9 times out of 10, it means we're taking a trip to the mall because she doesn't like the color, she doesn't like the way it fits, or it's old, or whatever. All of a sudden, she's like going, no, we're done. Now, if I, as a guy, go to the closet and say, oh, I don't have anything to wear, it literally means I have nothing to wear. It's time to do laundry. Exact same words, two complete different potential meanings. Another blocker or obstacle, in addition to the business content side and the technology side, thinking that they're communicating, but they're not, they're actually missing each other, there's also sort of a top to bottom communication where if you've ever listened to the executives and senior management speak to each other, it's almost like they're speaking in a completely different language and a completely different code. And they're speaking the language of leadership, the language of vision, inspiration, and so on. and governance. Now, that's the language of leadership. And this line in this picture isn't necessarily perfect. This is actually a result of me working with a company out on the West Coast. Oh, this is about 7 years ago. Flew out there during December and realized that as I was listening to the conversation in the room, and they hadn't drawn this picture up on the flip chart, but I went up and I drew the picture of executives and senior management, portfolio, program, project team, and people. And I said, here's where the two groups weren't communicating, because half the room was agile coaches. And not just agile coaches, they were agile purists, where they wanted to maintain a space for agile. That's great. The other half of the room were battle-scarred veteran management consultants. And as I sort of sat in the middle of the room between the two groups, and it was like a tennis match as I was going back and forth, watching, going, wow, this is really interesting. So I drew this up on the board, and everybody stopped and they looked at me. And then I drew sort of this rounded box from about program level up and another box from project level down. And I said, over here, you're talking the language of management on the agile side. And over here on the management consulting side, you're speaking the language of leadership. You guys are using similar words, and they mean completely opposite of how you guys are using those words. And they just looked at me, and the whole room went silent. And they were like, oh, it really hit them. And so in the transformation training videos that I've shared, I go into deeper why this language of management and the language of leadership is so important. But at the same time, this is also, if you think about the video of Jamie, where he was demoting himself back down to team level because he didn't want to deal with the politics. You know, the line might be between senior management and program management, wherever it's at in your company. There's a line somewhere where you stop speaking the language of management, of getting things done, versus speaking the language of leadership. What are the results, and how does that make us money, save us money, get rid of, mitigate risk, or how does that help us even do the right thing? That's the language of leadership. The language of management is, you know, here's the target, here's the goal, do it, deliver it, and if you don't, why? Who do I kick? And so that's always the risk of when managers are promoted into leadership, that they take that type of language with them. And so then you have a whole different host of problems. But anyways, there are two distinct languages here as well, and it's really important to understand the difference between the two. One of the things that I'm not sure our Agile friends have really understood completely yet is the difference between this language of leadership and language of management. And so if you look at the team structures and the program level items that are used, really safe scaled agile framework, Scrum at scale less, which is large scale Scrum. You choose whatever agile scaling methodology you want. All of those are just program level tools that they're trying to make them agile. And they do not address the soft skill of how to communicate to the leadership in the language of leadership. They communicate in the language of program management, and that's why companies are attracted to those. But primarily, everything from program level down are primarily language of management tools. Okay, and it's tool set thinking, and they're not getting to mindset. They're doing agile, they're not being agile. And so because of this, it's creating a blocker and an obstacle and an impediment in the organization. And so all of these methods and tools, tool set thinking, they only partially address the two languages. They primarily just address the language of management, but they definitely do not address the needs of the leadership. And so now we're going to start using this 4-box, and I use this extensively in the transformation video training series that I've done. And in the upper left corner, you have the individual, lower left corner, the team, upper right corner, product, program, process, line management, business ownership up in that right corner. Lower right corner is portfolio level upwards to the VPs and C-level and so on, directors and whatnot, and the board. And so it's really important to understand that all 4 boxes can have their own dialects of what they are speaking, which shows once again that on the left we have the language of management, and on the right we have the language of leadership. On the left, when you're talking the language of management for agile purists or agilists, typically at the individual level, they're talking about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. At the team level, they're talking about agile team facilitation, so that includes your Scrum Master for the most part, and maybe sometimes the product owner, and definitely the team is involved there. And that's primarily the language of management. We're going to show a slightly different picture here in a minute that builds on top of these thoughts. Over on the right-hand side, already at the product level on up, you're already starting to hear a change in the dialect. And so we'll talk about agile coaching, and the product owners, of course, work up in this box. And the program managers and the line managers, business owners, if you're using SAFe. All the scaled agile methodologies live up here in the product box. Down in the left corner is where things like Scrum, Scrumban, Kanban, XP, things like that, they're all living down in the team and individual boxes. So when you consider where the agilists work, and if you think back to that video with Jamie, this is what he was running into. He's used to speaking the language of management in the left 2 boxes, and he started working over in the right 2 boxes. And it was a new language for him, and it's a new environment for him. And it was like an alien language to him. And that's the dialect that the management consultants speak. The management consultants are sitting right down in the lower right corner, and they still work with the teams and the product owners and things like that. And so there's an overlap between what the agilists are trying to achieve and what the management consultants are trying to achieve. And if you think about the Cynefin model or the Stacy diagram, the management consultants are trying to distill everything down to best practice, to the most simple way to get things done. The agilists they're also trying to distill things, but they're experimenting and they're testing things very quickly. But they're not necessarily trying to get to best practice. They might be using good practice or emergent practice or even novel practice in order to get things done. And so that's sort of a major difference between the two. And so management consultants are speaking the language of leadership, and the agilists are speaking the language of management. And typically, the two don't get along. And just like the example that I gave when I was out in Seattle on the West Coast meeting with that company, watching half the room of agile purists and half the room of agile consultants, I really thought that they were going to start to hit each other and get physically violent with each other. It was pretty amazing to watch. And so because of this, it gets extremely complicated. The communications get extremely complicated very quickly. And this is another slide that shows, first, you have to be able to wear both hats. You need to be able to wear the hat of an Agile coach, but if you're going to be an Agile coach or an enterprise Agile coach and work with the executives, you better be able to wear a management consulting hat as well. Otherwise, they're going to eat your lunch. It's that simple. So you need to know, which hat do you put on, when do you use it, when do you wear it, and I think this is a pretty good picture of when to use which hat. And again, it's a situation where you say, well, it's not, there's no clear delineation. And it's like, yeah, that's right, because I'm going to give you the standard management consultant answer. When do you use which hat? Well, it depends. And there's a lot of overlap between these two, and the overlap is growing. And where you have overlap of two different cultures, that is where a new culture will emerge, for good or for bad. And so I'm observing that in the long term, if you want to be successful at all levels in the organization as an agilist, you better be able to wear a management consulting hat and be able to speak the language of leadership. If you can't do that, then you should be like Jamie and just go back and work on the left two boxes, working with the teams and individuals, because you're never going to be comfortable working in the right two boxes where you have to deal with politics, and politics is a blood sport. If you don't like getting the crap beat out of you in that sense, in a political way, and if you don't want to play that game, if you don't want to learn how to play that game, or even how to speak the language of politics, and how to mitigate the politics and how to eliminate the politics, you're never going to be happy working over on the right-hand boxes there. I hope that you get the idea there, because as you can hear, I'm getting a little bit passionate about this particular section. The second issue that we run into is dilution. Now, using the Cascading Vision setup where you've got executive, portfolio, program, project, team, and individual. Now, if each level you only lose 10% of the original message, it's sort of like the telephone game where one person whispers to the next person who whispers to the next person, and by the time you're to the end of 20 or 30 people, the message is completely changed and doesn't even resemble what you started with. Okay. Now, if you were able to only lose 10% per person, okay, just 10% per person, by the time a vision is communicated down through the organization, you've already lost 27% of the vision. It's already down to 73% at the program level. And by the time you're to the individual level, the loss is 47%. So you've lost almost half the message. And that's if you're really good and only lose 10% per level. This is why Dr. Cotter was emphatic about you have to over-communicate your vision for the change by at least 10 times, because he said it in reverse, that we under-communicate by a factor of 10. Well, that's another way of saying you need to over-communicate by 10 times. 10 times more than what you think. And if you over-communicate by 10 times more than you think, you can get that 53% there at the individual levels to start to move up towards the 70 to 80% level. But it takes consistent, repetitive, almost like drop by drop water torture of good news to get a vision to successfully cascade down through an organization. Because if you're just a normal organization, but you think you have really good communication, I'll guarantee you by the time that message is getting to the person, if it gets there at all, it's already you've already lost about half. And that's if you're only losing 10% per level. If you are losing 20% per level, already by the time you get to your program level, to your program managers, you've already lost half the vision. And worse, by the time you get to the individual, you've lost almost 75% of the vision. And if you're really bad at communicating and you're losing half at every level, well, at that point, you might as well try to find something else to do, because already just to the program level, you've lost almost 90% of the message. And by the time you get to the individual, the message is completely lost. And sadly, I think that this picture is probably closer to the truth than the other two pictures. Because if you were to ask your individuals to write down your vision, or the vision, even the vision for their team, word for word, I'll guarantee you that 98% of your people could not do that. And it would be an interesting exercise to test that and prove it. But based on my experience during the last 25, 30 years, this is pretty much what we're running into over and over. So these first two issues are negative issues. It's that, we're speaking different languages, which also contributes to the dilution, because we think we're communicating down through. And then the dilution itself, as you're ending up with a picture like this, where it's gridlock and it's basically everyone sits there scratching their heads, wondering, how is it that we get anything done here? I'm sure none of you are experiencing that, right? I know that I've seen this over and over. This third issue isn't so much an issue, is that it's an issue because most organizations aren't willing, or maybe they're just unable, to do the work necessary to find their one thing. Okay? And so this is also sort of what I call a distillation issue. It's because you're distilling from those 25 initiatives to the 5 initiatives down to a single initiative for the next 12 months that if everybody does it, it will deliver to the organization exponential, remarkable, stunning results. And I think that is speaking the language of executives, because those are the results that they want. So, bringing it all back together, cascading vision done correctly, especially putting the feedback loop in. If you got the feedback loop, now you have a way to start tracking, is what we're cascading in the way of a VSPT, is what we're cascading in the way of a one thing, is it actually making its way intact through the organization? And we won't know that unless we're actually having a feedback loop where the teams are communicating back to us the one things that they need. Because then you can compare the one thing that you're communicating down to the one thing that's coming back, and you'll be able to identify the disconnects in your VSPT, the disconnect between your vision and strategy and the disconnect with the people and the tasks. By doing it this way, this is a way of thinking, it's a mindset, and a way of working for the leadership to work together with the people in their teams to be able to create that feedback loop. In one of the projects on which we worked recently, we worked very hard to start to bring the executives directly into team level, bypassing all of the cascades, because what we were observing was that the feedback coming back was so heavily filtered that we're not sure that the same message that was being communicated upwards from the team back through the organization, that the message was actually connecting. And that was actually confirmed when we sat down and did a retrospective with the executive and a couple of his direct reports in the room. It was a very interesting meeting. It was extremely interesting First, because he was asking really good questions, asking the right questions, and it was like one of the team members started off with such an impassioned, glowing report of the team. It was just amazing. The one person he shared, this team means more to me than the group I work with. When I work with this team, it's the highlight of my day. When I walk into the agile room where the team is at, it's like a sanctuary for me. It's like a place where I can go and block out everything else that's negative that's happening in my work. When I come there, I know I'm in a protected environment. When I see my team members in the hall, we just don't pass each other and say hi. We actually stop and talk to each other. And these team members have become my friends. I'd be willing to throw he didn't say it this way, but he basically was saying, I'd be willing to throw myself under a bus for these guys. And he actually said that in a different way, where he said, yeah, when I come in and I see that my sprint backlog items aren't moving across the board, I really feel like I've let my team down. And the executive, that really stuck with him. And then they got into a discussion about when to use Agile. And as I've been saying all along, like with the Stacy diagram, because of the complex nature of the communications within this organization, one of the team members piped up when the executive asked, well, where and when should we use Agile? Basically referring to the Stacy diagram. And he drew a picture up on the board where you had Agile methodologies and then traditional. I asked him to cross off the traditional and write hybrid, because one of the youngest guys in the room piped up and he said, we should be using Agile everywhere. And that was absolutely correct, especially based on what we had talked about in the complexity of the communications, that these projects are 90-95% communications. Because of the complex communications, forget, is it simple technology? Forget if it's simple requirements. Because the communications are complex, that's why you should be using Agile everywhere. So I pointed out that we should integrate every part of Agile that we can into anywhere where they want to do traditional, in order to try to get traditional up to higher levels of performance. And then what was really interesting is that the day after, that executive sent in a couple of his direct reports to meet with me and the Agile coach, the Scrum Master for the team. And they're like, oh, how do you create a team that's willing to throw themselves under the bus? And it's like, guys, did you read the books? If you've read Nehemiah Effect, if you've read Flow, they wouldn't even be asking those questions, because it emerges from those books and from these trainings how you create a team that is that loyal to themselves, to each other. And the executive's like, I want that on every one of my teams. What's the secret sauce? How do we do that? Well, what you have in front of you, understanding the difference in the languages, understanding dilution, understanding distillation, and that you have to be able to get to the one thing. And it was interesting, with a couple of the teams that we worked there, both teams about third sprint in hit a distillation point that we don't typically write about in our books or blogs or things like that. But it was a very interesting point, and it happened about third sprint or third iteration in for both teams, where suddenly they looked at each other, they looked at the backlogs that they created in the original workshop, and they went, yeah, those items are important, but here's the sprint goal for this coming sprint. And the teams, both of them, and they didn't know what the other teams are doing, but both teams immediately started rewriting their user stories for the upcoming sprint, going, in order to achieve that goal, which gets us one step closer to the vision and mission, In order to achieve that goal, we need to do boom, 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 boom. And suddenly the backlog was filled with the items that would actually deliver the goal. And that's when distillation happened. And creating teams that are willing to throw themselves under the bus for each other, it's not a simple thing, okay, in one way. It's very complex. We're talking human interactions. But the one thing that will always bring a team together is that if they understand that those working with them, like the product owner and the scrum master and the agile coaches, if the team instinctively and intuitively understands that those three roles, the people fulfilling those roles, would, without hesitation, throw themselves under the bus for the team, that generates within the team the willingness to throw themselves under the bus for the other person. That is the foundation of servant leadership. And for me, it's amazing that a lot of leaders, they don't like the term servant leadership because then they feel like, well, I'm being made a slave to my employees and what do they know? And that's not the point. The point is, if you're walking the talk and not just talking the talk, then your team members will know that this person's genuine, they care for me, and they're gonna put their career on the line for me. When they understand that, that is so powerful. If there's a secret sauce, that's it. But that's what we've been teaching in Nehemiah Effect, in Flow, in our trainings, in our transformation trainings, even in our video set on why use Flow. And I'll be doing one more video set on using Flow with Agile and Scrum, what I would call flow-based Agile. And I'm not going to teach you Agile. I'm going to teach you how to take Agile and turbocharge it. But that's another presentation. This touches right back into what I was just talking about unifying the vision of the team. And a lot of people, they may come from a Judeo-Christian ethics background, Protestant work ethics background. But they might not actually catch the root and the origin of this framework, because in the original, it was actually applied in the negative. But because it's such a foundational principle, it works. And this part comes out of the Tower of Babel. Now, we live in a post-Christian West, both in Europe and the US, where people have totally lost touch with their roots. They still have a lot of Judeo-Christian ethics that go through the culture, through our cultures, but they don't understand the origins of that. And this is one of the most powerful, it's actually stunning, frameworks that comes from the Judeo-Christian tradition. And this is the Tower of Babel. Now, I really don't care whether or not you take it literal or you don't. That doesn't matter. And I really don't care if you're for Christians or against them, or for Jews or against them. That's not the point here. The point here is this is ancient wisdom that is as true today as it was 4,000 years ago. Human nature hasn't changed regardless of how much our technology has changed. If you see how people behave with themselves, not much has changed in 4,000 years. But this one's really interesting, and this is a framework that literally floated up off the pages of the good old book. And they were building the Tower of Babel. And if you've read the story of the Tower of Babel, you would know that humankind was told to spread out and populate the whole planet. Instead, they hung together and built a city, and they started building a tower. So God literally came down, looked around to see what they were doing. He went, oh my goodness. These people are all speaking the same language. They're all of one mind. Anything that they propose to do, they're going to succeed. And if you've read the extra literature, the Tower of Babel was meant to allow humans access to the heavens. And they had one third was going to go fight with the angels, another third was going to go fight with somebody else, and the other third take over. And what was interesting, and that comes from extra biblical sources, it's not there in Genesis. But what is in Genesis is God came down and he said, oh my goodness, look at this. They're speaking the same language. They're all of one mind. And anything they propose to do, they will succeed. That right there should stop everybody in their tracks. Because if you really listen to what was said, it's like, oh my goodness. They had a single vision. They were going to build that tower. They were of one language. And so at that time, according to the Bible, everybody spoke the same language. They were they were single-minded in their desire to fulfill the vision and build the tower. And they were planned it, they proposed it, they planned it, and they were doing it. And it's interesting that God's solution was to confuse the language. So he confused the language of all the workers, and they couldn't understand each other, and that's where the word Babel comes from. It's also, I think, one of the roots for the word Babylon. But he confused the language. And if you ever get a project, or if you ever get assigned to a project and you want to make sure it fails, the fastest way to help the project fail is to confuse the language, confuse the definitions, confuse the agreement, create a chaotic delivery, and guess what? You won't succeed. And so what was being applied in a negative way for the Tower of Babel actually becomes an incredibly powerful tool to unifying the vision for the team. That's why we spend a lot of time on definitions. We spend a lot of time on distilling agreement so that when we're delivering, everybody's able to focus and deliver great results. And then at the end of each iteration, we're double checking it to make sure that we're one step closer to the vision in the middle. So this is a very simple formula. One language plus one mind plus one plan equals the vision, or one vision. And one vision is vision first. And if you want a team that is willing to throw themselves under the bus for each other, this is one of the key tools for doing that. And when the team starts to trust each other based on being of one mind, they're speaking the same language, they've got the same mind about what they're delivering, then doing the plan is like breathing. And you'll have a team spirit that is focused on the vision, and it will become almost self-perpetuating. So this is a way to speak life using language and breathe life using one mind into the individuals and team members and the teams themselves. So this is incredibly powerful. And again, I really don't care if you like the source. The wisdom the ancient wisdom that's coming out of this is so powerful and so profound that you can ignore this at your own risk. But we've been using this for 25 years, and we know that this works. Now, I'm only including a couple exercises in all of this because it's basically impossible to do exercises when I'm on this side of the video and you're on that side of the video. But it would be a good exercise for you to sort of pause the video, and if you're working as a leader, enterprise agile coach, or an executive coach, an agile coach or team level facilitator or scrum master, or any type of agile project program or portfolio manager, okay, and you want to deliver exceptional value to your teams, well, it's not a 2-day course, it's a 1-day course now. And it's hands-on, exercise only, because we're going to go through all of the content here online with you. But Flow gives you the tools, the frameworks, the skills, the mindset that you can immediately start to use to successfully reinvent your organizational culture, starting with the C-suite all the way to the individual team member. Okay. So, on a post-it note, here's where you actually need to pause the video after I'm done speaking here before we go to the next slide, is pause the video, write down on a post-it note your personal vision, what's your higher purpose, what's your higher why, what your personal mission is, and then put your vision and your post-it note and your mission on another. When you're done, put them up on a flip chart if you want. Okay, so put them on one note each, I guess is what I'm saying there. Okay, so on a separate post-it note, write down your vision, and then on another post-it note, write your mission. If you've got a flip chart there where you're working, put it up on that, or just put it on your personal Kanban that you might have on your desk. By the way, I would advocate using a personal Kanban with doing and done, and have your post-it notes there, make it visible so that when your team members come in, they can say, oh, he's actually walking the talk, not just talking the talk. So go ahead and pause the video, write those down, and then come back. In this video, we looked at the dominoes as a metaphor, and that it only takes a little domino at the beginning to knock over a huge domino at the other end. And that sort of represents the link back from the individuals and teams back up through the organization. We looked at Cascading Vision, the 3 things to remember, and then we also talked a little bit about what's your why, what's your personal vision, and what's your personal mission. And we even put an exercise in here for you to reflect on and think about what is your why. And you need some post-it notes to do that, and we explain that in those slides on how to do that. So you can go ahead and do that right after this video. The right cascading, or the right cascade, link back and feedback back to the leadership from the team is the application of this. Okay, and the thing about this that's really, really powerful is that the one thing is bidirectional. And what I mean by that is that when you're a leader in an organization, if you have 20 teams and each of them were to come back to you with 10 items for improvement, and you have 20 teams, well, all of a sudden you've got a backlog of 200 things that you as an executive would have to look at changing. But if the teams choose their number one thing, and they send it back to the executive, and almost all the same teams are saying the same thing and giving the same kind of feedback, Then suddenly the executive can take that list of 20 items for the 20 teams, one each, and hone it down to maybe one or two items that will really help the teams reach that sustainable state of higher performance. Also, this is an extremely powerful way of gaining alignment all throughout your organization between you and your team and between you and your leadership. So it depends on where you're sitting in the organization, but this is really, really strong and useful.